Wait for the stream. Right, I'll declare this Extraordinary Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee meeting open. On Zoom, Councillor Crackett, and an apology from Councillor Abbott. Also departures from Reverend Cook and Mrs. Coote. That accounts for everybody, I think. Yes, it does. Somebody move the apologies accepted. Councillor Scout, seconded. Councillor Amundsen, put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against, carried. We have a major late item, and Mrs. Hadley, can I throw to you in the first instance to, sorry, Steve, I beg your pardon,
No.
to give us an outline of what it is, why it's here, and then we can decide what we do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors, your worship. The team at Splash Palace late last week received correspondence from a school advising that with some of the changes to the education outside the classroom messaging that had gone through the Ministry of Education and through the school community, indicating that children involved in education outside the classroom for ages over 12 years and 3 months were exempt from the mandatory vaccination passport requirements. And that obviously prompted our team to raise the question with me, and then we've raised it with Andrew and Claire as to would that change our position. And Claire then sought, or the Chief Executive, sought to seek some advice from local government New Zealand.
Sorry, the local government, central government COVID unit.
And look, it'd be fair to say it's not clear in terms of whether or not we should change, and so we're bringing this conversation to you today, and we'll provide some advice in terms of what it means for our two facilities that would most likely hold education outside the classroom, which would be Splash Palace and the library. The main statement from the email reads, councils can choose to suspend the use of the vaccine passes for EATC for children 12 years 3 months and up, or for larger school groups where event gatherings settings cannot be complied with. To do so, you will need to ensure that you are able to manage EATC participants in a defined space. And that terminology, defined space, is critical for us because within Splash Palace we only have two defined spaces. It's the entire pool hall and it's the small learn to swim facility to the side. In the library is one defined space. And that's on the basis that is as set out in the health order that sets that a defined space, or is a single space, that does not share the airflow with another space. And as a result, we've got a library which has a commonly shared airspace, airflow, and so it's just one. And so in order to fit EATC in to follow this mandate, we would shut it to everyone else. In Splash Palace, we have a separate facility in the Learn to Swim pool, but common areas in the reception and the changing room, which essentially makes it theoretically possible, but practically impossible. So we wanted to bring this advice to you today to get your guidance on do we want to adjust our mandatory vaccination passport requirement, and on the structure of the facilities, we don't actually think that there is a driver there that would warrant that. But that's from what we've looked at the advice and through you, Chair, for the Chief Executive, if I've missed anything, please feel free to add.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbling. Okay, first of all, procedurally an error on my part. I did not move that we receive this and deal with it as a major late item. I will do so if there's a seconder. Councillor Pottinger, thank you. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against, carried. So to précis and clarify then, Steve, the Minister made a statement in the media during a presser on Friday, which has been difficult to verify, and I guess one of the issues that's raised is around equity, but it's been raised with us throughout the entire vaccination passport process. However, the advice that you've provided this afternoon indicates that there are complications around airspace. If it was education outside of the classroom activities specifically, they need their own, and we can't provide that at the library. And we can't provide that at Splash Palace because of the combined reception and changing facilities. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if I might add to, the Learn to Swim pool is designed for people who are quite a lot younger, and the age category we're talking about is for children over 12 years and 3 months, and that facility probably isn't appropriate for their stage of development around Learn to Swim.
So the issue is, I guess, in the public side, further complicated by the fact that we've seen changes in this past week around MIQ for both Australian visitors, and firstly in the shortening of the time. For those that landed on the first day, suddenly they found instead of 3 days, it was 2 days. And for those arriving from the rest of the world from later in the week. So there is that sense that some of the COVID response requirements, not mandates, are shifting as the Omicron variant reaches a higher saturation level. Today's figure, by the way, 20,000 new cases. It's always been the government's intention, from what they've indicated, bearing in mind it has been confusing from time to time, that they were going to review the mandate issue, if I've understood this correctly, after the expected peak, which is due around mid-March, and based on the initial projections and current figures, that seems to be the case. So the question is, does the committee wish to proceed with a review now, or is it going to be better for us to indicate that we are prepared to look at things again post the peak when there is a change in status that comes from central government? I think that's the issue that we're faced with. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, 2 or 3 things on that, through you, Chair. The advice we got from the Ministry of Health at the Southern Leadership Group recently was that while the peak may very well be in mid to early March for most of the country, we're a little bit of a lag behind that. So they were suggesting that it may be well into April before we see the spike here. You can see that with the national trends, but the modelling's been very careful. So we may wish to wait for that, given that when the government eases the pedal off in Auckland and Waikato and some of those other areas, it may not quite be right for us. So that's one consideration. I guess the other consideration is, I mean, I don't know about other councils, but I've had quite a bit of feedback from people that are very opposed to not being able to swim at the pool because they don't have a mandate. Not the library, but definitely the pool. And we've held a fairly consistent line with that. You've got your passport or you haven't. The moment we start inching that out for some education type sectors, because it's more convenient for them to have the kids there than to have to try and manage them not being there for the ones that don't have the vaccines, I think we open up a Pandora's box. So I think we'll have more opposition from communities who say, well, I'm not going to go to the pool now because you're opening it up to the non-vax. So I think we should just wait a little while.
Thank you. Councillor Skelt.
Through you, Chair, thank you. Just supporting Steve and the comments he's made, just being involved in another venue. Unfortunately, the announcement on Friday from the Minister and then supported by the good doctor has just caused huge confusion, without a shadow of a doubt. So with an over the weekend from our venue, staff have been abused regarding those comments. The phone has been very active. Personally, it's been very active to me. Our venue was tagged last evening as a result of that comment that was made. In the sense, so that the community are incensed. Some of the community are incensed, I should say, through you, Chair. So unfortunately, the misinformation or the information that was given out at best was confusing. I'll use another word, but anyway, it's just unfortunate, exceptionally unfortunate, because now we have stirred up emotion again, once again, through confusing information. Steve is absolutely correct in the sense of defined space is the key. It is defined space is the key in everything we read. And the pool, the library, Stadium South and venues and so on and so forth. It's just impossible to actually, in practicality sense, to operate. It's simple, but it's causing mayhem in the sense of the wider community.
So just a question of clarification then, Councillor Scull, in the example of the stadium, even though you're able to have different parts of the stadium isolated off, it's still that common entry point that provides the issue?
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to support all the previous speakers and Steve and what they've said, and I do just want to add some of the recent stuff you referred to. I would just like to point out that is the MIQ facilities, etc. That is presuming that the incoming people are vaccinated. So we are looking at quite a different scenario here. We are still talking, are we not, Steve, about a request that unvaccinated participants in education outside the classroom would be allowed into our facilities. And we are not at the point where I would be prepared to change what we have decided on that basis. It may be something that we can relook at. Well, it will be something that we relook at once the peak is over, but this is not the time, and there is just no logical reason why we would make that change now.
Thank you. Welcome, Mrs. Coote. Andrew, are you able to provide a little extra light on the scenario?
I just want to make sure that the whole issue is confusing, and the problem that continually arises, and it arose when Council first considered this matter, is you had a range of overlaying pieces of legislation that impact this decision. And I think the response that Claire got from local government doesn't really assist you in separating those two different issues. The key point that I think is not fully understood or appreciated is the final sentence, which basically says the decision by council to mandate vaccine passes at these venues was not, to require vaccine passports was never mandated. So that's a decision that council has made. The EOTC requirements only apply when you're talking about mandated spaces. And it's as simple as that. So that's Councillor Skelt's problem. He has a mandated space. If he wants to operate the venue over certain numbers, he's caught by the mandate. Council facilities, again, subject to the number limits while we're in red, never required a vaccine passport. So you could have education occurring there without complying with the education requirements. It just has to meet whatever council's requirements for that space are. So by putting those two things together has confused it, which drives council staff down the defined space question, which is really not the issue. Because you only have the defined space problem if you're operating under the EOTC rules, which council doesn't have to. We've said we've got a mandate requirement, but that doesn't automatically bring the education rules in. I mean, I know it's complicated, but can everyone understand there's two different questions here?
So the difference being the space that ILT Stadium Southland is, because it takes a far greater number of people, is different to the likes of the library and Splash Palace, where council policy has required the provision of a vaccination
as we discussed
passport.
When this was first raised, council could always operate these facilities without a mandate, without a vaccine passport, sorry. It was council's election to impose the vaccine passport. So if we let people without a vaccine passport into those facilities, we wouldn't necessarily have the defined space question to deal with, because that's not part of our ability to let them in, if that makes sense. But because the sports facilities, different facilities have requirements that are imposed as soon as they elect to operate, that then drives them down a different path. But it's just really confusing, and I appreciate it's difficult for everyone to understand, but it is important because it's the mixed messaging out of the government. We're loosening up, we're not loosening up, but they're not giving anyone the clarity to be able to make a decision. But at the moment, the schools can't go there because they don't have a vaccine passport. If you said we're going to let schools or certain school children go without a vaccine passport, that would just be a decision that council made. It wouldn't have to have the defined space overlay. But the schools would still need to be able to comply with their side. They'd have to have a teacher that's vaccinated. All those other bits from their side would still be required to apply, but not necessarily the venue requirements.
Thanks, Andrew. That did help, mostly. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just as a reflection on that and what Leslie was advising earlier or commenting on earlier, when you look at the stats for Omicron at the moment, there's a disproportionate amount of teenagers in the hospital admission. And the ministry has said it's because, not because they're not vaccinated, it's because they're more mobile. They tend to, you see it in the Castle Street type parties recently and other things like that. So given that increased risk in the 12 years plus group, and given that we at the pool service people who are maybe compromised, elderly people that have hip and other issues, that may want to do aqua jogging or mild levels of swimming, I think that we need to balance those two out and not lose sight of the people that are there that will not appreciate we opening the doors on that until we know the spike's gone and the risk minimises down.
Councillor Pottinger.
Look, I go back to December 7th when elected members in this room voted unanimously, except for myself and Councillor Ludlow, on mandating both venues. Now, there were no community cases in sight, I don't think even in the South Island yet. To me, there seemed to be a sense of extreme paranoia and leap into the most extreme mandate policy when other councils around the South Island had a look and see approach, where they would see how many community cases there were and then act from that. I guess we've missed our chance. I would like to now revert the policies and open up both the library and the pool. I mean, I'd love to see how Omicron survives in a high chlorine environment. That's just my own intrigue, but yeah, look, I think we've done our dash. We had our opportunity. We did not consider all practicable options, and as Andrew has commentated, it really is in our hands. And I still remember a number of the elected members in this room saying we need to show leadership. Well, I don't call that leadership when that decision was made. Now is an opportunity to actually show leadership, but I still don't see it coming.
Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, I'd just like to voice my support for what Councillor Pottinger was just saying. In fact, they've never been comfortable with it, and from what we're hearing of the Omicron thing, I think it's a lot milder. The borders are basically opening up to people who are sure they're vaccinated or they test negative, I believe, coming into the country. We're opening to the world very, very shortly. Government's given mixed messages. I believe that we should be doing the same thing as Councillor Pottinger is suggesting, that's opening up our facilities to all children, all people, library and pool. That's my view. So, and we can change that, I believe. Yeah.
Council is able to review its policy at any stage. Your Worship.
Yes. The issue I'm wrestling with is how we deal with the march that's coming in the morning. I volunteered, as did Councillor Clark, and we were told the last time we met a group of their leaders, I think it went for 2.5 hours, the meeting, and the government was saying you shouldn't meet these people. And I think it's, if we want to keep sort of civil unrest to a minimum standard, from my experience, it's better to downplay it as much as possible. And I see the other councils have put up showers for and I think that softly approach is a good one.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, the Wellington Council didn't bring in the showers. The freedom protesters did. I think tomorrow, to put it into a context, is simply about receiving a petition. Councillors, anybody else? Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say, from my point of view, we have the same vulnerable populations as we had when we made this decision. I see no reason why we should not continue with this cautious approach at this time. When we have reached the peak in this region, that would be a sensible time for Council to re-look at this matter. But at the moment, from my point of view, the same vulnerable populations are there as were there when we took the decision. They provided very valid reasons why we took the decision we did. My view on that has not changed at all at this time.
Councillor Skelt.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I can only echo Councillor Soper's sentiments. I can't come to grips with either Councillor Pottinger's or Councillor Arnold's summation of because medically, if you just read simply the medical data around the findings and the population and where it's moving to, it's quite simple, without me sounding arrogant. And Councillor Soper's correct. We need to get to the peak before we go anywhere and do anything. So I'm just dumbfounded, to be honest, that we would even be considering this. We have an obligation to our community, and in particular our vulnerable community and our young folk. And if you look at the stats, it's clear. It's very, very clear. So
Councillors, you've received the verbal report and we're now looking for a decision. So what we need is a recommendation on the table. Councillor Clark.
So would it be helpful for somebody to put a motion that we maintain the status quo that we've got at the moment until a certain time frame and then review it again?
That or not are our options, I see.
Yep, and let people vote accordingly. Well, I'll move a motion that we maintain the current passport system for library, Splash Palace and this chamber, and through until the middle of April, and reconsider it then.
Second
So we give some certainty for about 6 months.
Point of order. I'm just wondering, looking at the late item, I thought this was a report to be received, and if any further action was to be required, then a further staff report would come back with details and options, not a kangaroo court type.
Thanks. Mrs. Hadley.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if the way forward would be if Councillor Clark was so prepared, would be to break that motion into two parts. The first being that there be no change in stance, and the second being a request for a report to the meeting to be held on Tuesday the 12th of April, noting that school holidays would start on Friday the 15th of April, and so that may be a useful time frame in which to reconsider the matter with an officer's report attached.
Happy to support that, Chair, and the rationale for that is I get quite a bit of feedback from what you'd loosely call the anti-vax group to say, well, we don't agree with what you've done, but when are you going to review it? Is it now relevant or not? And I think that satisfies that.
So motion in two parts then.
I think I might have been recorded as the seconder of the original motion, and I would also agree to split into those two parts.
Okay. Is anybody clear on the motions? That the current stance is maintained and that a paper comes back and is reviewed at our meeting on April 12th. Any further questions or comments? If not, I'll put the two motions. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? No. Carried. Thank you. That was the only item that we had for this extraordinary meeting, so I'll close it and we will have a workshop underway very shortly. That will end our stream. Thank you very much.